Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another panel at the Film Music House during the Sundance Film Festival. I am here with Mike Tuccillo, composer of the film Homeroom, which is currently screening at the festival. So go check out for tickets today if you haven't already. Mike is a composer of such projects as Rami on Hulu, Love Life on HBO, and Out of Omaha, directed by Clay Tweel. I am really happy to have you here, Mike. Thank you so much for joining me. Why don't you tell us about your film? Tell us about Homeroom. What is it about?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say I'm happy to be here. And yeah, so Homeroom is a doc that follows the Oakland High School class of 2020, and it chronicles their fight for racial justice before that fight has become a national conversation over the past year in 2020. And it follows their journey through the coronavirus pandemic and shows how they navigate coming of age in a time like 2020.
So, is this your first film at the festival?
This will be my first doc at Sundance. Yeah,
Nice. So,
very
and-
exciting.
but have you been to the festival before? Have you been able to experience it in Park City?
No, I've only heard stories, so I know that I'm missing out this year.
Well, we're bringing these virtual backgrounds to you so you can kind of get a feeling that you're in Park City, that it's nice and chilly. So how did you get involved with this film? Were you contacted by the filmmaker? Were you recommended onto it?
Yeah, so basically, Pete Nix is the director, and he had given a lot of autonomy to the editors. By the way, who I would love to plug right now, Christina Matwani and Rebecca Adorno the fantastic work. They did great, and he gave them a lot of leeway to temp with music that they felt fit the what they were going for, the tone of the film. And they had temped with a lot of music from Rami, which I had scored alongside Dan Romer, and then Pete and I got connected from there. And the score ended up having to come together in about 3 weeks. So it was a real quick process.
Wow. Yeah, the film score has a very youthful kind of pop element. So I'm sure it must have been temped with all sorts of, interesting elements of Rami. Now, were you kind of going in this kind of youthful pop element because of the high school, theme, or what made you feel that that was the right choice?
Well, so before I even put any pen to paper, or wrote a single note, that we had a couple of conversations, and it was clear between Pete and the creative team that it was really important to keep the kids' voice as the center driving force of the narrative. And in order to do that, we wanted to create, in order to complement the cinema verite style, we wanted to create enough space in the music where it felt introspective enough. So that means, some synth sounds and textures that kind of don't have a strong start and end, and they feel kind of spacey and verby, to kind of give that sense of space between what the kids are experiencing on the screen and what you as a viewer might be experiencing. So to kind of create that space where the viewer and the doc can kind of meet in the middle, as opposed to the doc being heavy-handed. And then also we wanted, as you noted, a sense of innocence and hope, which was important to highlight for Pete. Pete wanted to really highlight the fact these are kids. Even though they're talking about really like things that maybe some adults in America are just becoming woke to now, this is something that these kids have been dealing with their whole lives, and they have elevated opinions on it, and they're articulate. And so we wanted to highlight the fact that they're young. And I think another thing that you noted, there was a desire to have a veneer or a wrapper of like, maybe this is something that the kids could listen to, or like sound like it could have been a needle drop, maybe, so there was a certain element that we were trying to tap into where it's like, it did want to feel like it was in their world.
Absolutely. Well, it definitely plays really well outside of the film. So I hope that there is a soundtrack release or some way to release some singles off of this because, yeah, I found the cues to be really, really fun, energetic, and enjoyable in that space.
Thanks.
So you mentioned the crunch time. A lot of Sundance films have this kind of extreme crunch time to finish the film in time. What were some of the biggest challenges in completing this film to deliver it on time?
Well, one of the things that was a little bit of a challenge was finding the vocalist. So Pete Nix had this idea of there being some elements, some timbres that are very pure, and one of those pure elements and timbres that you could hear is just the unadulterated human voice. And I'm no vocalist. So I needed to find a vocalist that fit what I thought, excuse me, would work well with what we were going for. So I went through the Rolodex and was contacting friends of friends and listening to people's voices and seeing who had the right character. And I was fortunate enough to get in touch with Sonny Stepp, who's an artist out from Brooklyn, a multi-instrumentalist, very talented. And we clicked, and luckily he had some availability and we were able to make it work. But part made it a bit crunchy, but we got through it.
That's great. What was some of your musical upbringing? Did you study film scoring or did you study a sort of music composition?
Yeah, so I went originally to school for jazz performance and essentially left college to be in a band, and eventually started doing bass work like professionally, just like gigging with other musicians and going on tour. And that eventually led me to realize, like, oh, I don't want to spend the rest of my life on the road. I want to have a family. And that kind of led to more studio work, production, and mixing. And my relationship with Dan Romer kind of like started when he was in a band and I was in a band. And then we kind of continued as he moved more into film scoring. And I kind of went out to LA with him, and eventually my career kind of shifted more towards film scoring and everything. But I think it's always been through that lens of like exploring sound on a timbral level and really wanting to, experience the various ways that timbre can affect an emotion.
What is a great example of that for you, where you feel like music timbre, or maybe there's a specific score or song that stands out to you that really affects emotion?
Well, I think a great example of it in someone else's score that I could point to right off the top of my head is like the score from Moonlight, where some of the cues are so simple. And I know a lot of composers probably get a lot of those cues as temp. And sometimes the hardest temp to replace is pieces that are really simple. And so there's one piece, not to get into too much detail, but it's just essentially like 1 minor 4 1, which is a very simple progression. But what sells that piece is, I think, a large part of it is the timbral quality of the strings and the piano and the way that they're engineered and recorded, and I think that I look for a certain amount of texture in a synth, whether it's close sounding synth or a far sounding synth. I want it to have a certain sort of like something that you could almost like kind of feel like imagining a lot of sound as like having almost like a sandpaper like texture, and I'm attracted generally to like grainy textures. And so I feel like when I hear that grainy texture, it's able to elicit a lot of what happens emotionally is based on the chords and other things. But in terms of just the timbre, I feel like the grainy texture to me kind of brings up a certain level of nostalgia. It brings up a certain level of like warmth when you hear a sound that feels old and worn, right? Like I think everyone has their own feelings about what an old sound evokes. And so, that's one example of how timbre can kind of evoke an emotion.
So where do you draw inspiration from when you're struggling? Do you ever turn to other visual media or go for a walk? Or when you're facing a writer's block, what's your kind of tools to get out of it?
Mm. Well, I think in this sort of scenario, there wasn't really a whole lot of time for writer's block, and that definitely helps stave off writer's block. But I do like to I like to find the thread that drives the piece. So in this scenario, we're talking about racial justice or racial injustice. And with the first couple of days that I was working on it, I just kind of went through a process of thinking about what can I pull from sonically that elicits that. And racial justice is a conversation that we've been having in this country for a long time, for many generations. And I immediately thought of Dr. King's speeches. And so I pulled a lot of inspiration from that, because in some ways what Dr. King spoke about is not very different than what these kids are speaking about. And so I took uh thankfully Dr. King has sort of a orator style expression where he elongates vowels. And so it was very easy to take a couple of words and stretch them and add effects to them. And a lot of the synths that you hear are actually Dr. King's words. that are manipulated. So like when that works, it's very easy to stay inspired, because it just, every time you hear that sound, you're like, I know where this comes from. You feel inspired just by the sound. So I think that for me, a large part of staying inspired is liking the timbres that you have at your palette.
That's pretty incredible, and it's very creative to think about utilizing the speeches and words of a, a figurehead that's really important to the subject of the film, and incorporating that kind of audibly into the score. That's a fascinating approach to to kind of really getting the message embedded into everybody's subconscious. So what is coming up next for you? What can we expect past Homeroom?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that are in the works that I can't quite talk about yet, but obviously there will be a third season of Rami. There's going to be a second season of Love Life that I'm really excited about, and a couple other indie artists that I'll be working on. There's a project that is near and dear to my heart that I'll be releasing in 2021 called Animal Animal, and I'll be sure to contact you about that when that's up and rolling.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I really look forward to checking out this film. It sounds very timely. And you mentioned the director's name earlier. Is it Peter Nix?
P Nix, yeah.
Pete Nix, yeah, who also won a Sundance Award back in 2017. He does incredible work. So I know that we can expect great things from this film and great things from you coming up as well. And yeah, please look into releasing this score as a soundtrack, because that would be really, really fun to listen to.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you watching, make sure you go to the Sundance ticket booth online and try to get one of those digital tickets to see Homeroom. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike, in the Film Music House.